Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our session. Local government reporting can be fun. During the session, we encourage everyone to type in questions that come to your mind in the Q&A box on your screen. We will present those questions to our speakers at the end of the session. Today's presenters are Chris Suarez and Allison Wrable. Chris is a reporter for the Richmond Times-Dispatch covering Richmond city government and transportation. After graduating from VCU with a degree in mass communications in 2014, he went to work for the Daily Progress in Charlottesville as a local government reporter. His time in Charlottesville coincided with the ongoing community debate over the removal of Confederate monuments and the infamous Unite the Right rally. His coverage of those events and other local matters related to government transparency, community development, and affordable housing earned him the distinction of VPA Outstanding Young Journalist of the Year in 2017. Allison is a reporter at the Daily Progress in Charlottesville and has been covering Albemarle County government for 4 years. She previously covered business for the newspaper, and prior to moving to Virginia, she attended the University of Missouri, where she covered local government at the Columbia Missourian. Thanks to both of you for joining us today, Chris and Allison. I'll let you take it from here.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and we're doing a slideshow presentation here. So if you give me 1 second, I will share my screen. Oh, I think
you should be able to share.
1 moment. Oh, it says I'm disabled, can't do it.
All right, hold on just a minute. There's always a technical glitch. Share. Don't want people to see my screen. You know, this is the first time I've had that issue today, guys. So hold on. Sorry, everybody.
Okay. Allison, by any chance, are you able to do it?
Let me see. Oh, no, I'm not.
I'll share. You share. Hold on. If you want to email that over to me, I can pop it up really fast. Let me figure this. Let me see here. Oh, here we go. I might be able to fix. There we go. Can you share now?
I think once you disable your screen share, I can do mine.
Yeah, I'm clicked on security. Share screen. I might disable mine. Oh, just a minute.
There we go. I think I can take it over from here.
Glad we figured that out.
Thank you for bearing with us, everyone. All right, so today we're going to talk about why local government reporting can be fun. Specifically, we're going to be discussing a couple of stories that both of us have done, both together, and then in my time at the Times Dispatch. So these are stories that typically involve covering local government meetings, pulling documents, records, engaging with elected officials and government staff, and regular people as well, and connecting to our audience. But let's first talk about like why local government reporting is important. Alex S. Jones, who used to cover media for the New York Times in his 2009 book, Losing the News, Future of News That Feeds Democracy, describes local news coverage or serious news as sort of the iron core of journalism. That's everything that really informs our electorate, the public, and helps us kind of keep a robust democracy going. Unfortunately, we all know that journalism jobs have been on the decline over the last decade or so. I think I've seen statistics that say anywhere between like 40-50%, from 2007 to 2015 or so. So that makes it a lot more difficult to kind of do the day-to-day coverage of, covering meetings, gavel to gavel, committee meetings, so on and so forth. But even if there's fewer people to do that, I think it makes it all the more important to make sure that you, one, have fun, so you're not just stressing yourself out, and two, to really connect with people. So not everything has to be a hard-hitting investigative story. So that we just got to remember that, part of journalism is kind of holding up a mirror to the public to help everyone determine what's important to them, to the public, to our public life. So that said, I'm going to pass it off to Allison, and she's going to start with our first story that we've done. This was from a couple of years ago. Take it away.
So in I think actually this was 2018, we wrote about a development proposal that we actually found out about through the county's application website where they upload applications. And we kind of latched onto it because we thought it was funny that they said that they wanted to plant 7 acres of really dank bud. And we were curious if they were able to do that in the future. Would they really try to do it? The whole thing led us to interviewing the developer who head of the public meetings, who said it was a joke between kind of him and staff, that he really wasn't going to be doing it at this property back in that time if it got approved. But Albemarle is actually pretty open with their documents, and they have a whole website where they upload nearly all development proposals. They even used to upload pre-application meeting documents. So if they were meeting with people about proposed developments, you could see those. They don't do that so much anymore, but they have their applications and proposals on the publicly accessible website. And they also have listservs where they give you more information about what stage certain development projects are in, especially things that are more typically by right, that don't need approval from the board members, and where they are in that process. And you can kind of see what staff are saying about some of them. This really, in this letter we included on here, led to a really interesting story that still is kind of ongoing. They did get the rezoning approval from the county, but the city project is kind of still a little bit in limbo. So it's always important to find out what data and information your community has available. Even if it's something as simple as applications, they can always be interesting stories ahead of meetings, or even after meetings if you miss it, but there's always more in the documents.
So kind of on the same track of development, so I've got a meeting here, or a picture of a Hanover Planning Commission meeting from, I think it was a couple of years ago. It's from the RTD archives. But very often, you can attend a planning commission and they'll talk about, anywhere between like 3 to a dozen different kind of development proposals in that community. And it can be kind of dry sometimes, but sometimes you will see, public engaged, such as this instance. This was, I think, back in 2019 when I was covering Hanover for the Times Dispatch. There was this permit application for a local VFW hall to build a new garage. They needed a special permit for that. And what their plan was, they said that they wanted to display a Vietnam War era Huey helicopter, which you've probably seen plenty of times in like the Ken Burns Vietnam War documentary, or movies like Platoon or Full Metal Jacket. But the whole process, it was interesting because it really unearthed, in the county's review of this application and the site, they realized that this VFW hall had been partnering with this Military Vehicle Association on Veterans Day and Memorial Day every year for the prior 3 or 4 to do these kind of like war game things for kids, kind of running them in a Jeep through this trail in this wooded area, wetlands. So the neighbors got upset because they had a ranch with horse and cattle. And they're saying that all this noise, every twice a year was like startling, their livestock, and they were being told by their vet that even if you put them inside the barn, they're liable to hurt themselves. So I thought this was very fascinating, and just off of that meeting, I probably could have had an interesting story. But I realized, this is a great opportunity. Why don't we just take a beat and like go and actually meet these people? And I think it really helped us kind of tell the story visually, where we were able to go to the VFW hall, see some of these these tanks and all these crazy things they had on their grounds there, and then to also go to the ranch to go meet this man and see his horses, the cattle. And I don't have any photos of it, but he also showed us, sort of the stream erosion that he was talking about. So I think it was a great way that you can kind of liven up a story. It's like, it's not just this dispute happening at a meeting and you're just kind of talking about the process or the procedure, but you're kind of, when you see things like that, take a moment and kind of go meet people where they're at. So this was a fun story. I enjoyed it. My dad used to be really into like taking me into military surplus stores as a kid. So I also just had fun. I mean, again, the theme of this thing, fun's subjective. There's a lot of things that we do in our day-to-day jobs, which some people might find incredibly boring. Certain stories that you can pick up. But there are certain stories you can pick up that, it might resonate with you because there's something that you have a personal affinity for, an interest, and, enjoy it. So I think that also kind of leads me to this other story I did when I was working in Charlottesville, was that, with most, whether that's a board of supervisors or city council, their regular agendas, they'll typically have, things that they'll approve in a block vote. Not everyone does this, but sometimes it's called a consent agenda. So you'll have like resolutions, funding allocations, and they typically just kind of really just glossed over. They're very rarely will officials really kind of like talk about it. It's all there just to kind of expedite the process. But what I would recommend to like, new reporters covering local government is look at those consent agendas. I mean, take a look like at what exactly is being funded. And if there's something that catches your eye, you can kind of turn it into a story, just contact people, such as in this case. I think this was also back in 2017 or 2018. I saw that the city of Charlottesville was donating these bikes to this police foundation for what they described as this thing called, I think Pedal Power was this program, and it was run by this officer. And me personally, I've always loved cycling. I'm kind of casual. I shouldn't say like I'm a hardcore, cyclist or anything like that. But I was just kind of curious about it, and I called a couple people, found out, oh, they're actually doing this, like the foundation and this program this cop has. They're doing like a community event at this church. It was kind of close to my house, and it was like a week or two later. So it was something I was able to just tuck away. I was able to like write about pretty easily. It was not a very hard story, but I had fun doing it because I, got to ride my bike, kind of just level with people, just chit chat, very casual. And it was fun because this little festival, they had like this, if you see in the photo down here on the right, they built like a little, like not an obstacle course, but a trail, next to the church property. So I rode through that. They played this game where they had these kids kind of go through this obstacle course where they had to put our newspapers into bins. Did that too, and it was great. I mean, and it was just a great way to kind of build relationships with folks. I mean, it's so important in journalism that you kind of take those opportunities to like come and meet people, and so that they recognize you and get to know you. And it's not just always you're responding to a crisis or something, some kind of controversy. Like they'll see you as just someone else in the community, that you're just sharing stories.
On that note, a little bit too, having relationships can obviously make for better interviews and articles and make follow-up stories quite a bit easier. So while this wasn't necessarily fun for people, we were able to cover this event live, which ended up being a school board meeting that was about Confederate imagery and dress code in Albemarle County Public Schools. And some community members had started a meeting kind of outside of the typical meeting setting and ended up getting arrested. And most people who were out in the secondary room were asked to leave the building, and including other members of the public who were bystanders in all of this, and some members of the media. And so we were able to, because of a relationship I had established with a county police officer who typically went to Board of Supervisors meetings, I was able to call him up the next day and ask him a little more detail about what the police response was that day and why it was the way it was. Because no one else, the chief didn't have any comment that day, the county executive didn't have any comment that day, the Commonwealth's attorney didn't have any comment that day, but that officer that I had already established a relationship with in a very casual setting of Board of Supervisors meetings, and he was just the officer who was most regularly there. He was able to answer the call that I made to him because he knew me and recognized me, and was able to help give us more information than we would have had without that source. So getting involved and writing non-controversial stories like Chris's bicycle story, for example, can lead to more open dialogue when there is a controversy. I also had a good enough relationship with this officer that he would give us tips about other things, including some bigger stuff that we haven't gotten to quite yet, but with school resource officers and security guards in the schools. And there's obviously a lot of talk about that, and both the city and the county here are making other plans for the future for that. So being able to have a relationship with a staff level person who will kind of help you with things is always important, and kind of a basic reporting thing, but it was fun to be able to just call this person and have them help us greatly, versus not getting any response to an incident that had a lot of repercussions going forward.
Yeah, and I would add to that is that, you know, in having also covered Albemarle a little bit in Charlottesville, and even in where I'm covering now, where I'm covering Richmond now, but I covered, you know, the counties in Henrico and Chester, or sorry, Henrico and Hanover here in the Richmond area as well. But when you're attending a lot of these meetings, you know, pre or post pandemic, let's say, you're going to end up sitting in a boardroom for hours. Sometimes it can drag on for a long time. There can be closed sessions where, you know, the board members are talking privately and you've got to wait for them to get out. There's a lot of people just hanging out, like the security guard Allison talked about. We was talking about the Albemarle County office building. And it's great to just kind of, you know, even without thinking about building resources or sources, it's just a great way to pass the time. It's a great way to just, like, you know, yeah, like we're talking about reporting being fun, but yeah, it can be kind of dry and boring, and there's a lot of waiting sometimes. So, you know, just making friends and getting to know people, that's important. Allison, we've also been doing a lot of coverage of malls in our jobs. So in Charlottesville, she's been covering a lot of stuff at Fashion Square Mall. If you want to talk about that a little bit too.
Yes. So in Albemarle, because I'm a nerdy person, I like to sneak local government things into business stories, which I think is kind of fun. But with the decline of malls across the country, there's obviously been a big interest in the local Charlottesville Mall, which is Fashion Square Mall, and it's in Albemarle County. But there's a lot of rumors always about who's going to buy it, even though it's not technically for sale quite yet. But is UVA going to buy it, which they're not. But all these things come up nearly every time there's some kind of story about something at the mall. So Albemarle hasn't been as directly involved as some of the communities that Chris will talk about next, but they have had a big small area plan effort, and they're looking to soon we'll be adding form-based code and optional form-based code overlay into this area. So it's a pretty big intersection around US 29 and Rio Road if you've ever been to the Charlottesville area. And it's a pretty major thoroughfare in the state, one of the few roads that it isn't an interstate, but goes from the northernmost point of the state down to the North Carolina border and into North Carolina. So it's a pretty well focused on area in the state, but the small area plan is what the county hopes to see in the future. Obviously, it's a plan and not a fully implemented plan, but it's a plan looking at what they want in the area. Had a lot of community involvement with that, not so much from the Fashion Square Mall level, but it is an important part of the potential redevelopment of the site. And I've been putting stuff about that aspect of things into mall stories when stores close or when the JCPenney site was sold, just to kind of keep people reminded that UVA is not in line necessarily to buy it at this point, but the county is thinking about it and has had a lot of discussions and community work sessions and board meetings, planning commission meetings, all about the property of the mall and a lot of the surrounding area. You can go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so as Allison had just said, so in Henrico, local government's been very involved with, kind of the development of future land use and rezoning for a lot of these malls that have kind of become run down and are not seeing a lot of tenants are leaving. And I don't know, personally, this is again something that I've found very interesting. Obviously, I think a lot of people, older audiences and people even our age, I mean, Allison and I are both in our late 20s. We can both remember like kind of going to the mall in high school and stuff and hanging out on the weekends and during the summer. So I kind of enjoy writing these stories and actually like going to these places because it's like, I didn't grow up here, but it's fun to imagine, what it must have been like for, for kids in high school, 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago. And then to kind of see the future vision that a lot of these developers are presenting and seeing people involved with them. So that was cool. But I would say, one of the things that's sort of important when we're talking about like business and development is that it can be kind of exciting to see some of these like, the renderings, like this pool, like in this case with Regency Square in Henrico, the county has been working out a deal or plans with this developer to bring an aquatic center to revitalize the mall, as well as like a trampoline park and a few other things. At Virginia Center Commons, which is off of 95 in between Route 1, they just recently started demolishing it and are working on plans as well to build an indoor public arena so that the county can host regional like basketball tournaments for high schools, kind of adult leagues, other indoor sports like wrestling, volleyball, what have you. And again, I'm saying it's fun to imagine these things, but like it's also important that in doing that kind of reporting is that you include people, what they think about this and what kind of visions they have as well. It's not just a developer. I mean, a lot of times, you see a lot of local governments trying to engage the public because these are our communities. We may not, a lot of us may not be, involved in the business or the development, but we can have a voice and, presenting this stuff to people, we can kind of inform them of what's coming. And if they don't like something or if they like it, they can express that. So Allison, more talk about tourism, entertainment, business.
So in Albemarle and Charlottesville, there's always kind of been a little bit of rifts, but one thing that the Board of Supervisors in the county and the City Council kind of agreed upon was to make changes with the Tourism Board. And I ended up staying through an entire Board of Supervisors meeting as I typically do. And at the end, during comments from board members, one of the board members brought up a letter that the board and the City Council were sending to the Tourism Bureau. And it was about making changes to the Tourism Board and potentially trying to add elected officials onto the board. And so that kind of kicked off a bunch of stories that are still an ongoing saga of changes to the Tourism Bureau. And it kind of highlights the importance of meetings. And I know Chris kind of touched on this, 2 meetings can kind of be boring and drag on, but typically there are a few bigger meetings in communities that are important to regularly attend. And I would argue City Council and the Board of Supervisors are those meetings in this community and probably many others. This letter, we would have eventually, I think, found out about it, but we got it kind of early on in the game before other people realized what was going on. And so the changes have led to the Tourism Bureau at the time, the leadership almost completely leaving and changing over. And now the controversy is that there are elected officials on the board, and some in the tourism community are not happy about the amount of elected officials on the board. So things that it's always, I think it's fun to have the context and the knowledge from this story that's really been going on since the end of 2017 and is still not completely over yet. And you can see some of the fun advertisements the new advertising agency that they hired made. Obviously, I somehow picked both that revolve around wine, but they ended up going with the campaign on the left instead of the one on the right. People were a little bit offended by the spitting, but obviously in the right context, when it comes to wine drinking, that was important for them to note, but they changed it and went with the one on the left. So it's been kind of fun to be able to go to some of those meetings and talk with people in the tourism industry about what they're doing and how that has played out in advertising this community, which has been important not only in the aftermath of what's happened in this community in 2017, but really as, especially now with COVID, things are opening up more and they're really looking for people to come back to this community. So business owners are really wanting the Bureau to promote the area so much more. So more to come with that. There's more to see about the Tourism Bureau. Anyways, Chris.
So this is the last story we'll talk about, and then we'll take some questions. But again, speaking to the importance of sticking through meetings, it's again, can be very dry. There's a lot of things that may not seem very interesting to you that are just kind of procedural. But sometimes you can see things that, you know, discussion points will come up, and there could be a payoff. Such as in this instance, a couple years ago, this was also in 2017 with Charlottesville. Some of you might be familiar with the Tom Founders Festival in the Charlottesville area. It's a pretty prestigious event at this point. They've been doing it for, I think, like 6 or 8 years now. But back in 2017, a couple weeks before it was supposed to happen, I saw, again, you know, referring to the consent agenda, that there was this item that the city was going to sponsor the festival with $25,000. And I was sort of interested because, like, I'd gone to the festival for the first time the year before, and it seemed like it brought in a lot of money. I mean, there's tons of vendors, tons of, you know, food carts, beer sales, beer trucks, things like that. And I think that's sort of part of the, you know, there's a lot of programming that happens that whole weekend in Charlottesville. But I was just kind of curious about it. And then one of the council members said, you know, I don't think this should be something that we just put on the consent agenda. And then they discussed it. They pulled it off, but it's just became a discussion at the very end of the night, at like, you know, 11:30, I believe. And it kind of stuck with me. I was like, you know, why would a council member think that this was important to take off the agenda and for them to discuss? And it wasn't even that big of a discussion. It was still a 5-0 vote. You know, they had the festival's directors come and speak. But it got me thinking that the next day I was like, you know, I remembered having covered previous budgets that for outside fund, non-departmental funding for foundations, charities, things like that, they typically have to go through a pretty rigorous process. So I actually, like, you know, pulled the books that I had on my desk that I received from the previous year covering budget meetings, and saw that they had made applications, and then tons of city and county staff that are part of this review process for those applications had kind of called into question, you know, their applications and the money they said they needed, saying, and they made a request, you know, the city needs to ask for an audit. You know, come to find out, calling a lot of these elected leaders later, that, oh, you know, the festival director actually called us directly. He made the appeal to us to sponsor some kind of new side event or thing they were doing part of the festival. So again, you know, we're talking about journalism being fun, and it's subjective, yes, but I think for me, that was a lot of fun because it was something that I know a lot of people in town love, that I had also gone to and enjoyed, but realized also it was that sort of fun journalism in that I felt like I was onto something. I felt like I was doing good accountability journalism, and sure enough, it paid off. That months later, I had, when something else like this came up with a charity organization asking for funding, some council members were kind of squeamish about it and saying like, well, okay, we're going to attach a bunch of strings and like, we're going to update this policy because I didn't even report it, but they later admitted, we didn't even follow our own policy when we gave the money to that foundation for the festival. So I would say that gets me to my point is that if you're in journalism, chances are that you're in this because you like to be a little nosy, that you like to kind of ask questions, probe things, hold people accountable, hold their feet to the fire. And I would say really embrace that. Don't ever lose sight of like, that's what we're here for. And if that's fun to you, that's why you're probably doing this job. And just stick with it. All right, and I think with that, we will go ahead and take some questions.
Well, thank you so much, guys. What a great discussion that you all had. We have one question right now. The question is, and you can decide who's going to answer it. Do you typically decide which topics are story-worthy based on the meeting agenda ahead of time? Or are you taking notes of what to investigate further and who to try to talk to while listening to or recording meetings?
I'll take a stab at it first. I think I do a little bit of both. We typically try, at least at the Progress, usually to cover at least one story out of some of the bigger meetings, especially like I said, city council or board of supervisors. But I'm always listening for broader ideas or kind of making connections between things that have been said before or other issues that are going on and comments that are made or little strings to pull and follow up on. Especially with some of the smaller meetings, it's hard to get to kind of everything at those levels, but there's usually little interesting tidbits of information that kind of come out at them. And I think having your mind in both of those realms is important. And especially nowadays when there are fewer journalists at most news outlets, it's important to kind of pace yourself and not grab on to too much at once, but sometimes it's more beneficial to wait a little bit and be able to talk to people after meetings or other people who aren't around maybe for that meeting for more information on certain topics. So yeah, I usually try to pick one thing out of some of the bigger meetings, but if it's something that I'm just interested in, I will listen and follow up with people or ask other people questions later. I don't know, Chris, you want to take a stab at that one too?
I think, the demands of what kind of publication you're working at are going to be quite different. Both of us work at a daily. So it's like a lot of government meetings, we're sort of seen as the paper of record still in a lot of regards. So like we still need to write, typically in the spring, there's going to be a lot of budget work sessions, budget meetings where things get introduced. You're going to have to write something about that day of. And typically, that's going to be pretty short. That's not, you shouldn't put too much emphasis on it. You definitely want to do some pre-reporting and like contextualize those kinds of things. You don't want to just put like a story that's only 10 inches and has some numbers and like, it's just people are just going to gloss over it the next morning when they pick up the paper or look at it online. So there are times, yes, when you kind of before a meeting, you always want to like kind of be prepared, do your homework, look at the agenda items, the staff reports, and decide, if there's something that people are interested in, that people are going to sign up to speak, plan to write about it that night. And if there's like kind of more, if you feel like there's a lot that went happen in that discussion or that you probably couldn't get to on night of on deadline, there's nothing wrong with, writing up a follow-up story, either the next day or for the, a bigger news feature later on. And of course, like we've said, and with some of these other stories, a lot of these great stuff kind of come up with things that like you kind of might miss, like when you're kind of doing that homework or, what on the surface sounds really boring, but then you get to the meeting and you see like a kind of robust discussion or a lot of people involved, and that's sort of where you might want to like decide where to go. And again, I think something that's wonderful about journalism, and at least where I work and where I have worked, is that editors will give you kind of space to kind of pick and choose what you want to write about. Again, things are going to be kind of dictated by, what's sort of like the meat and potatoes of journalism, like a daily newspaper, like whether that's budget stuff or I don't know, I can't think of any examples right now, but yeah, but always, take a look at those things. And again, I know we're talking a lot about stuff we've kind of pulled from, Board of Supervisors, City Council, Planning Commission, but there's always, well, at least in some localities, like you're going to have, kind of subcommittees that also can kind of yield really interesting stories. Like I'm covering Richmond now, and I know I didn't share any Richmond stories, mostly because I transitioned to the beat during the pandemic, and it's kind of hard to make stuff fun when it's a lot of just Zoom meetings, but also kind of be looking at those agendas too. Other smaller communities, I'm sure they have other commissions that have a lot of citizen members. Going to those, getting to know people that work there, that's a great way to kind of see other issues that some of the council members or elected officials might not be thinking about or giving kind of much attention to. So that's what I would say.
Well, we don't have any other questions. I want to thank you both for joining us and being patient while we had the little technical glitch in the beginning. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Bye.